Oh, 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 girl, I'm in love with you, but this ain't the honeymoon. We're past the infatuation phase. We're right in the thick of love. At times we get sick of love. It seems like we argue every day. I know I misbehaved and you've made your mistakes, and we both.
So welcome again to the Mini P Pod, and we are so happy that you're able to join us again this week. And so we're continuing our series called Love Yours that we began last week. And the series is actually geared more towards the Louisville community, but if you're outside of the Louisville area, please continue to watch because it is applicable, the things that we're talking about outside of the Louisville area, and it definitely can be applied to many different areas. So please again continue to watch, and we thank you again for joining. And today our topic will be on actually just doing too much. And so I hope you will bear with me and really take what I'm about to say to heart. And I'm really speaking to all of us. And so I just want to really say something that I believe is necessary and that really needs to be said in order for our community to really heal. And so I wanted to talk about just doing too much. And so if we are actually hot-headed or impulsive, then we are really doing too much. So whether or not we are like just, wilding out on people, or if we are just running it, always, running it, and whether we're gossiping or just, talking a little bit too much about everything that's going on that we probably shouldn't be talking about, then we are certainly doing too much. And also if we are just like out there just doing the most and overreacting to everything that's going on, then also we are truly doing too much. And so we can also be doing too much in other ways. So one of the ways that we can actually be doing too much is actually by, antagonizing others, be it our daughter-in-law or a son-in-law. And so they can take that energy that they're pouring into trying to keep you from doing just that and to really helping the community out. So if there is hostility there, then, I guess what I'm trying to say is that, we are doing too much when we should really be pouring that energy into another area. So please think about that as well. And then also there are other things that we could be doing that would also be considered doing too much. And one of them is just really always chasing the paper. And so if we're always, pouring all of our energy into chasing a dollar, whatever the case may be, and we don't have time to help out in other areas, then, we are actually also doing too much. And if we're spending all of our time, trying to be the star when there is no star, so we pour our energy into that, trying to chase that down, then, really, I think we're doing too much in that area as well. And so I hope you guys can receive all of that in love. And so there are several things that can be said. But one of the other things is if we really need help, and then we won't receive help within the community or in our individual lives, then we are also in that case doing a whole lot, doing way too much. So God actually created us to help one another. So if we're not receiving the help and we're just refusing it because, for whatever reason that we're doing it, then we are actually also doing too much. So another area that I wanted to really touch on as well before we go to the main topic, I guess that we're going to talk about that kind of pairs with this, is that if we are always falling out about everything and just, always falling out and just really about things that, we should be able to absorb. And so, I know everyone's different, and I know we've been through several different things, and I certainly do not try to overlook that fact. But I do want to say that there is like a spectrum for what we should be falling out about at some point. And so if you're always falling out, and then I think I would have to argue, and some may agree, that you are also doing too much in that space. So there are several things that we need to work on as a community. And one final thing I want to say about this is if you are always using scripture to try to get your way or try to get people to do things that you want them to do, then truly you are doing too much. And if you always want to assume a role in an event or an endeavor or in a place where you're not really gifted to do that, then you are certainly doing too much. And so God has gifted all of us who have received him with all kinds of gifts, and I dare say talents. And so it's imperative, if we want to invite God in to help us in this community, that we actually kind of line up where we need to be. And so there are several things that I just wanted to mention today. And like I said, I hope we're receiving it in love. And I'm certainly including myself in the number of, of persons who need to really take a step back and to really think about what we're thinking about, and to really take a step back and to see if we are actually in a place to where we should be in order to help this community to really do better and to be better. And so you might ask, Patrice, why are you talking about this when we're talking about, helping the community to be better? And the reason why I am is because it's going to take all of us to really take a hard look at ourselves and to really work, really to allow God to work on us in order for us to be able to help someone else. And so, as I mentioned before, if we want to continue or to begin the process to allow our community to heal, then we ourselves have to be willing to let God come in and to help heal some things that we may be struggling with ourselves. And so I mentioned earlier that there's a spectrum for things that we should be falling out about. And the reason why I say that is because if there are trials or troubles that we are facing or that others are facing that we're allowing to cause us to fall all out about, and this always the case, then the danger is that we are really forgetting about, we're forgetting to look to God for that, and forgetting about the fact that he's here to help. And so that's why I kind of mentioned that beforehand. And so again, it's mentioned in love, but I mean, God wants us to look towards him, and he wants us to remember that he's there to help and to reach for him in every situation. So with that, I want to say that I hope that we can make a deal. So let's make a deal, Louisville, that we will actually invite God in to our situation and let God help us. And one of the reasons why, and I guess I'll touch on it in a second, but again, I mentioned last week that I've been really praying for God to send help from the four corners of the earth. And so he has certainly responded. So I was like, God, thank you. So when we pray, just know that he does answer our prayers. And so one of the reasons why we want to invite God in is something that I'll share with you that I actually kind of gleaned from listening to someone else this week. And so it was Bishop Walter Scott Thomas again. He actually was our spotlight last week, but he actually mentioned this week is that, when we invite God in, God won't just come and meet us in our situation. God will go to the source. And so he will go to the root of the problem. And so a lot of times what he mentioned is that, what Bishop Thomas mentioned is that we want God to come in and to deal only with the problem. But God is smart enough to know that if he only deals with the problem, then once that problem is out of the way, because most of our problems have roots, that another problem is just going to spring up in its place. So God will deal with the root of the problem, and he knows exactly what needs to happen. And so while we may be just kind of interested in, like, God, come in and help us, get past this, God will come in if allowed and will actually deal with what needs to be dealt with. And so that we can move forward in a much better way, a much better situation. And so with that, I want to mention another thing that Bishop Thomas actually shared this week as well. And so we certainly can glean from him, and I'm so thankful for God sending a word through whomever he sends it to us through. But one other thing that he mentioned is that one of the problems that we have is that we tend to think that we are responsible for, solving every problem that comes into this world. And so what he assured us is that we are not responsible for handling or solving every problem that comes. That no, some problems are way too big for us to handle. And so that's why we need a Savior. That's why we need God. And so that is definitely why we need to invite God into our situation. And so, as I say every week, there's nothing new under the sun. This is not God's first rodeo that he's seen where people have had to reach out for him and have failed to. And so I wanted to touch on that just briefly as we go along. And I wanted us to spend some time really looking at a character that, that mirrors our situation, because I think it helps that we don't have to feel ashamed or feel like we're outside of the loop. But because, again, God has seen it all before. And so I wanted us to talk a little bit about, Peter as we go along through this. And so we won't be long. And I know we talk a lot about Peter this time of year as the Easter season comes up. But I just wanted to share a few things about his life, and as it mirrors some things that we may be going through as well. And so Peter was human like the rest of us, and so he made some missteps just as we do. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about, I guess first of all, is an encounter where he was actually on a boat with 11 other people, and he had been sent, out from shore by Jesus himself, and they were trying to sail to the other side of a sea, I believe. But the whole point of it is that somehow they got stuck, and they were trapped in a storm where there was waves and wind as storms bring, and so they were unable to make it to shore because the wind was against them. And so they were out there for many hours, and I guess the word says that they were out there until the third watch, which I believe is after midnight. But they had been out there for some time, and so that in the response, Jesus actually comes out towards them, and he is walking on the water. And so they think he's a ghost, and so they're even more afraid, even in the midst of the storm. But as Peter, Jesus tells them not to be afraid, and when Peter hears that, he asks Jesus a question. He was like, "Well, Jesus, if it's you, then bid me to come." And so I wanted to pause right there because that is, I guess, something I want us to be able to talk about today. And so it's a topic that we talk about a lot. And so we don't really know why Peter asked, Jesus Christ to bid him to come, to ask him to come towards him. But a few things that we do know. And so one thing that I guess I'm certain of is that they were all in danger and had been on a boat that could not make it to shore. And Peter himself was a fisherman. And so a lot of times I think we glamorize the story that, Peter actually, he was adventurous. He wanted to walk on water, and that may be the case. But if we dig a little bit deeper, I dare say that Peter was also wise and that he knew that they were in danger. And so he actually had, I guess, some degree of sense that he wanted to get out of the situation himself. But the problem lies is that he actually wanted to get out of the situation, but the request that he made of Jesus Christ did not benefit the other people who were in the same situation. And so again, we don't know why Peter elected to get out of the boat. And so we don't know if he, again, had good sense and just knew that they were not going to make it and that he wanted to come to where safety resided. And if he knew for a fact that there's safety in the arms of Jesus Christ, which there certainly is. But again, it's his request, at least at first glance, it seems to be centered only on himself. And so you can look at that a whole lot of ways. And that, Peter could have been like, hey, you know what? Every man for himself, because if they want to get out of this situation, they could ask, hey, bid us to come, or whatever the case may be. Or either Peter could have been like just not thought about them at all. And the truth of the matter is, if any of the other disciples had wanted to get out of the boat, they could have asked. But again, I think when we think only about ourselves in a situation is kind of what I'm trying to get to with this, then we tend to miss the opportunity to really ask the correct questions and to really make a good request of God. And so the thing that's 100% certain in this is that Peter had been on a boat not too long ago, and he had actually seen Jesus himself like calm the storm and the waves. And so a better request may have been, it's like, hey, can you calm the waves? Can you calm the storm? And then we would all be okay. But that was not the request that Peter made. And so again, we get it. Peter, they're not on the Titanic, and if they were, then we also know what happened with that boat. But so we know there's danger, and we know that that the wind is against them, and it's probably not a good idea to remain in the boat. But I guess what we're saying is that, I guess what I'm saying is, as a community, that mentality of every man for himself, so to speak, if that was the case, than what Peter was thinking. But either case for us, the mentality that says every man for himself is not going to help the community in Louisville and anywhere for that sake. So I guess I want to highlight here that we have to think differently and really to make requests of God and to really invite God in, yes, but also to really seek him to help us as a community. And so big up to Peter, because he had made the decision that he wasn't just going to sit there in the midst of danger and remain there. So, that's no problem with that. But again, I think the issue was that Peter only dealt with the problem that he saw, the thing that he saw as the problem, and not, he didn't make a request to really would let God deal with the root of the issue, which was, the fact that they were in danger, they were in a boat, they probably would not make it had Jesus not intervened, and that they really needed the storm to cease. And so I think when we get into situations like that, if it causes, when we think only about ourselves, so to speak, if that's what was really happening, then it causes us to actually forget the things that we've actually seen of God and seen Him do in the past. And so, as we're reaching out as a community and inviting God in, I just wanted to share that. And so, hopefully, we'll keep in mind that we can ask God for anything, and so we keep others in mind as we're making requests. And so, once again, God by nature will ultimately deal with a situation by doing what He knows needs to take place if we allow Him into a situation. And so, when Peter, he didn't ask about, Christ calming the storm, but actually, when, that's exactly what happened. So, by the time Jesus made it into the boat, the storm, was calmed. And so that's one of the things. So I think with our self efforts, if we tend to believe that we know best, or if we don't really invite God in and kind of give Him, I guess, the leeway to lead and guide us, then we tend to really try to come up with our own solutions and our own self effort. And so that doesn't normally get us to the places that we really need to go. And so I'll touch on that. And I really am going to step out here a little bit and say something about, some of the, I guess, the movements that are going on, that are trying to help with the racial situations that are going on right now that still need to be addressed. And I certainly agree and certainly get it. But I mean, I guess the thought is that if we try to do any of that still and don't invite God into that situation, then it's all self effort. And so we have never been successful doing anything without God. So I just wanted to put that out there. And so a lot of times I think people hear it's like, we don't need to really go there or to invite, a Christian perspective in, or a perspective from God into the situation, but we certainly do. And so we cannot do anything that is eternal in effect, that's going to last to be substance, or I guess I don't even know what the word I'm trying to look for. Anything that's going to last or to be truly beneficial without God. So I just wanted to put that out there, and not to say that that's really what's going on, but I think there has been, I guess, a little bit of conversation about that. And so I just want to encourage everyone to really invite God in, no matter what we're doing, to try to affect change in the Louisville area. And so, and definitely in our community, and no matter what method, where we're trying to find change, be it in City Hall or in our community, but amongst, everyone who's living in, throughout the Louisville area itself. And so again, to do anything of eternal significance, or to become able to do the things that God would like us, well, to become more like God, let's say that, or to accomplish the things that God would have us to accomplish while here on earth. And so we will have zero success without really inviting God into the situation and allowing Him to help us to get that done. And so we need Him in that regard. And so not to, to say too much about that. And I don't know if we ever could say too much about it, but we actually need God in that space. And so relying on God is not inaction on our part. And so I wanted to say that, and I was actually able to really have, I guess, something I was reading earlier this week really impressed that upon me. And I said, I definitely wanted to share that with us. And so, so relying on God, depending on God is not inaction. So we are still in need of, action on our parts. And so we need to not sit back and not do anything, or just sit back and, and I guess regard the wind, as some people might say. We really have to really figure out what God is saying to us, and then, actually stand up and actually march forward and do that. And so with that, what it really means is that we allow God to kind of illuminate our minds, and so to really to teach us the things that we need to know, so that we are able to respond correctly in given situations, and actually to work on the things that we need to work on to make this community better. And with that, also, it means that we need to follow the guidance that He provides, that He being God provides, because following that guidance will transform our character and will align our desires with God's. And it will also strengthen us so that we can endure any hardship that may come our way, and so that we can also continue to serve God in whatever way that we are intended to. And so big up to Peter, because he, as the story goes, he eventually is out there on the water, and then he actually begins to sink because he takes his eyes off God. But he even with that, he made a very wise choice. He actually cried out, God, save me. And so I think that was a wise decision that he made on his part, because only Jesus can save. And so I think that he actually, he realized that, and he cried out. Well, I'm sure he knew that before, but he cried out to God. And so that was a very wise choice on his part. And in response to that, Jesus did just what he asked. He actually reached out and grabbed Peter's hand and saved him and brought him back safely to the boat. And so again, I'm asking that in the Louisville community that we actually, let's make a deal, right? So let's make a deal to let God help us to really figure out things that need to be done and to really invite God. Let's make a deal to really invite God into the situation so that we will know how to march forward. And again, we're talking about this today because as we all desire a change in our community, to really allow God to help heal the community, then again, we really have to let God kind of start with us. And we may not be totally off the rails, so to speak, but then there are also things that we need to improve upon, or really I guess things to allow God to improve upon in us, I guess I should say, that we really need to invite God in to help us with those situations so that we can be available to truly help someone else. And the truth of the matter is that people receive things better if in fact they know that we're working on ourselves, as we're talking to them about trying to do some things. And so people around are always watching. So if it's the young adults that we want to really to stop doing, stop killing one another, if we want them to stop doing things that we as a community don't find healthy, and that are not healthy, then we ourselves, I guess, show improve, as we would say. And we definitely need to do things better and kind of walk better in front of them so they see us changing, and so it definitely helps the situation. And so with that, I'll say as the second thing I want to share today, so let's make a deal to also to have the crucial conversations that we need to have. And so again, I'll say there's nothing new under the sun. Under the sun. And so when I talk about having crucial conversations, there are conversations that we need to have about some things that we really kind of have not been willing to face or willing to have. And so we'll fast forward over to just another account of in the life of Peter real fast. But I wanted to share, and actually I'll wait and share that in a second. But so in another account in Peter's life, just to let you know, this is not God's first rodeo again. And so this is not we're not the first group that God has found to struggle with this issue. But even in Peter's life, so there's an instance that happens later on where Christ is actually telling his disciples, that he is going to have to really lay down his life in order to accomplish the things that he's come to earth to accomplish. And so Peter is there, and he's like, you know what, pulling Christ aside, like, this will never happen, and so, he's really rebuking Christ for even mentioning that it might happen. And so Christ has a response to him. He responds to him like, you know what, no, basically, get back, because you're in my way. And so he says that he was like, really, he really recognizes that Peter is being used by the enemy. So at that point, and so he's really like, so he calls it for what it is. And so one of the things that Christ actually responds to Peter saying is that, you're more concerned about the things that are about the things that are going on in and around you, the things that humans are concerned about, then you are concerned about what God really needs to take place here at this very moment. And so that's the conversation that Christ had with him. And so I think it's easy for us to do just that. But I think what we're trying to say, or what I'm trying to say right now, is that Peter shows up with this "I got this" mentality. Actually, in this situation where he's really saying, Christ, to Christ, I will never let this happen, and no matter what. And so that is kind of where we may get off track sometimes as well, and just thinking that we can really do things in our own strength, and really when the situation is really a place where we really cannot. And so instead of Peter really taking them a moment to really talk to Christ about, so what shall we do when this happens? Or what should we do, if this does happen? Peter he really doesn't take time to have that conversation. And so I think we can fall into that trap as well, where we really need to ask some questions, or really to have some discussions that we really may not want to have. And so we may be facing some things that we may not, things may be leaning towards a way that we don't want them to lean. We may not want things to turn out a certain way. But even in that space, we really need to be able to ask the correct questions. And so Peter here, I think he later asked, where, Christ, where are you going? And he asked, why can't I go with you? And so those were the key questions that he may have asked. And so I think that Thomas also asked, which was another follower of Christ and one of his disciples. And he actually asked, how can we know the way to where you're going? And so he did ask that question. And so, and even to, to give, Peter a little bit of credit, I think James and John, which were two of the other followers of Christ, they kind of asked, can we sit at your right hand and your left hand when we get to glory? And so they were asking, so they were asking questions, but not necessarily the questions that really would benefit them as they traveled along the way. And so the evidence of that is, and I'll fast forward this story if you may not know it, is that, Christ was actually apprehended, so to speak, later on. And so Peter actually pulled his sword and, and cut, servant's ear off. And, and then Christ was kind of like, don't do that. That's not what I want you to do. And so had they had the crucial conversations early on, and not felt like they really got this, then they may have really known what to do in that situation. And so I'll say one other thing about that is that later Peter actually followed Christ into an area, to a courtyard where they had really, the people who had apprehended Christ had taken him. And so that was another opportunity that Peter probably should have asked, what do you want me to do? And he probably would have known whether or not he should follow him there. And so we'll talk about that in a second. But I wanted to pause for a minute because I had planned to talk about just this, and really not to take it any further than that. And then I had the privilege of actually hearing a message that Bishop Walter Scott Thomas actually preached on yesterday. And so I feel like I need to really add something to it based on what he shared yesterday. And I said again, I've been praying for God to meet me, to send help from all four corners of the earth, and God has continuously done this, which is almost amazing to me that that it was just same topic that he was talking about, and he really expounded upon something that I think we really should share. And so one of the things that Bishop Thomas shared during his message on yesterday, actually, with us, is that there are so many conversations that need to be had. Conversations between parents and children, serious conversations that need to be had that are not taking place. So there are conversations between friends that are not taking place as well. And there's even conversations between, and I guess in the workplace, and even between neighbors, I would also add, that need to take place. But for some reason, we are not willing to have those deeper conversations. And so he kind of mentioned that there is a kind of avoidance that we experience, where we tend to avoid having those conversations with our children or with our friends or whatever the case may be. And there's also, I guess, a certain unwillingness to really have it. And so, in addition to that, he also mentioned that there is a fear. And so I guess the fear is that we don't really want to have it kind of rock our world, so to speak. That we don't want the answer to kind of set things on a different course than we had planned. And so we don't really want to deal with that. And so one of the other things he also mentioned is that knowing the answer, it can really cause, our lives as we know them to be disturbed. And we really don't want that. And so we don't really, I guess if it be it a family matter, or even if we flip back and really talk about, I guess, the Peter and the Christ's other disciples, and them not really asking him the vital questions they should have asked. And one thing that Bishop Thomas suggested is that they didn't want to know the answer because they were afraid of what it really meant. And so they didn't want Christ to change the plan that they had in mind for their lives. And I think we are kind of the same way when it comes to the things of God. We don't really want to ask God or really to have anything, be it a conversation with our family members or with God, to really rock that boat, because we don't want to have what we had hoped for change. And so we're a little timid with that. And so I think one of the things that Bishop Thomas wanted us to really to take note of is that even in that situation, even if things do change or whatever the case, and if things are said that ultimately hurts us, then God is allowing us to be in situations where we are faced with having to have certain conversations, because he knows that it's necessary that we have them in order for our lives to move to the next level, and or for us to really to move to the next level of service in him. And so the conversations are necessary, and if they're painful, I think one of the things that he was trying to highlight for us is that we can certainly bring those things to God, and God will help us with the hurt. And that God, Jesus Christ came to reconcile us back to God, so that we can really have God in our space, so that we can work on ourselves, so God can help us work on ourselves, or really work on us, so to speak. And so one of the things, so we're plugged back in because of Jesus Christ with God, and so there's a level of growth that needs to take place in our lives, and sometimes that's painful, but then it's up to us to really to do that work. And so we have Christ that plugged us back in, and I think that was one of the points that Bishop Thomas was trying to make. And so it's up to us now to have the difficult or the challenging conversations with God and with family members, and whatever the outcome, that whatever we need to change in our space to really to move to the next thing that God would have us move to, we need to do that work and be prepared to do that work, and to trust that God is going to be there to help us all along the way. But that we can't stay the same, because if we stay the same, then we'll be in the rut that we've always been in, and we won't be able to go on to the next thing in life that we need to go to. So I think one of the things that Bishop Thomas was trying to share is that, don't be afraid to ask the difficult questions, because, they're necessary. So they're crucial conversations that we all need to have in life, and that we need to trust God to be with us every step of the way as we go through that. And so the other thing is that, just to be aware that we can't expect God to do all of the heavy lifting. And so I think another example that Bishop Thomas gave is that, we want God to, to heal our relationship with so-and-so, or we want God to get rid of the virus, or we want God to do X, Y, and Z in our lives, but we don't want to really do anything. And so, but I think he was trying to encourage us that, we have to allow God to show us the way, and it requires us to do something in that space to either become better people for that relationship, or to really seek out what we should be seeking out, to figure out what to do in the climate that we're in. And so we really need to seek God and work on our relationship with him in order to know the way, and not just to follow I guess anything that's set in front of us, but just so we will know the way. So really the thing is that we're plugged in with God, and that we need to with that expect to continue to grow, and to be challenged, and to have to do things to to really, that whatever God is putting in front of us, to make our lives better. And so one final deal that I wanted us to make today, as we're talking about let's make a deal to help make our community better, is to make a deal to really live bigger than just for ourselves. And so again, I've mentioned a couple of times, I've been praying for God to really send help for us, to really to show us, how to move forward, and not just to talk about some things that are going on in the Louisville area, but to actually to really affect change, and to really see things really unfold in a way that's really going to be helpful for all of us. And so last week we talked about ways to really to allow God into our heart. And so one of the ways we gave was to really to give, and as a way of being more like God, and a way of allowing our hearts to change. And so we said to give to persons who we may think don't even deserve it in our estimation. Or and so, but if we want to be like God, then certainly, we might recognize that we don't always deserve his goodness and his kindness towards us. And so that's one of the ways we talked about really trying to affect change in this community in the Louisville area. And so this week, again, we're talking about ways that we can really help, allow God to come in and to help heal some things in us, so that we can be better as we seek to help, others, find their footing and find their way. And so again, if we could talk about one final thing that we can make a deal about, and again, I said just to live bigger than for ourselves. And so God sent help with this message by way of Bishop Jakes, all the way from Texas. And so I was like, that is a very pertinent point that we need to grab hold of. And so to really to not just live, for the things that to put, I guess what he said was to just for things to put in our closet, and just to for our own possessions, and to have a bigger house, or a car, and to live for those things, but to really live with purpose in mind. And so specifically what he said is that we don't want to live just to be able to, to pay bills, and we don't want to live just to get by, so to speak, or again, to just fill our closet with things. We want to live for a greater purpose, something greater than ourselves. And so one thing I actually pointed out is that, all those things are fine, to have the home and to have the automobile, or to have, things that we possess, and, clothes in the closet. But he said, but as long as there's some evidence that we've tried to help somebody else, then those things are fine. But I guess the problem comes in when we are doing all those things, and that is our focus, and we don't have a focus outside of that to really is geared towards really making life better for someone else. But in order to do that, one of the things that Bishop Jakes, he actually encouraged us to do is to recognize that we have to have boundaries in our lives. And so one of the things he pointed out, and this is an awesome message, I'm certainly going to leave it down in the comments, and trust me, all of the messages that were heard this week, I think I'll link them all down in the comments, because they are definitely worthy of hearing in their entirety. But one of the things that Bishop Jakes shared is that, we have to, again, have boundaries in our lives. And he said, without boundaries, then anything can get in and anything can get out. And so there are people he mentioned that are actually benefiting from us not having boundaries. And so he just asked that we really take time to do an assessment to figure out what's really going on in our lives, and to figure out who is actually benefiting from us not being, from our dysfunction is the word he used, and for us not having boundaries. And he actually said that, we should draw boundaries around the things that we allow ourselves to entertain in our own minds, the things that we think about. And so we definitely should put some boundaries around that, and so not to let everything enter in and remain there. And so he suggested that if there are things that are going wrong in our lives, it's because we have allowed our walls to come down, our boundaries to be down. And so that, and the issue is that we need to rebuild those boundaries. And so he gave an example. He said, if you want to know how somebody got your money, it's because your walls were down, your boundaries were down. And if you want to know how somebody got into your life that wasn't supposed to be there, it's because, your boundaries were down. So I just wanted to offer to add to that something else that Bishop Jake shared. He said that, boundaries are not the things that we will do. Boundaries are determined by the things that we will not do. And so a lot of us have been through a lot of things, and based on, things that have happened in our lives, and so a lot of hurtful things possibly, and actually a lot of us may have gotten burned, so to speak, or by dealing with others, some situations, or with certain things. So it's understandable that the walls may be down in our lives, but I think what Bishop Jakes was trying to encourage us to do as we look towards, really being our best selves, is really, taking time to realize it's a process, but the rebuilding is necessary. And so if our lives are going to get better, we have to, jump back into the game, and actually, brick by brick, he said, just really to, put our boundaries back up. And so we stop allowing anything in, and then things that don't need to come out, do not come out. And so he took time to point out that, that God wants us to live bigger and our lives to be better and with purpose. And that also that, we have too many things going on to not have boundaries. And I think the specific example he gave is that, some of us have too many enemies to have our walls down, to not have boundaries in place. And so by way of boundaries, I think some things that Bishop Jake suggested is that we need to rule along those lines of boundaries. We need to rule our tongue. We need to rule over our temper, and not let our tempers get the best of us in any situation where we find ourselves. And we need to rule over our fears and our feelings of unworthiness, so to speak, or even rule over our depression. And so those are the things that he offered up. And so, but I would dare say we also need to rule over the people who we allow in our space. And he touched on that, but I wanted to highlight that again, because I think that's one of the things where Peter ran into some issues when he actually, during the last account that we really are speaking about, when he found himself following Jesus Christ, when Christ was arrested, and they took him into, into a courtyard and into the home of someone to be interrogated and some other things. And so Peter followed at a distance, but he actually came all the way into the courtyard. And that's one of the conversations I would dare say he probably should have had with Jesus Christ. Is it that you want me to come along with you when this happens? And obviously Christ knew what was going to take place, and he could have really advised Peter whether or not, he should have been in that space. And so the thing that, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that Peter found himself there and in the company of some persons that he probably should not have been in the company of. And so one of the things, I apologize if I'm getting ahead of some people who may not know the story, but one of the things that, Jesus Christ had talked with Peter about is that he kind of knew what was going to happen with Peter that night. And Peter ran dead smack into that situation, and really, and a lot of it, I think, was based on the fact that he came into a courtyard that was full of enemies of Christ, and he sat down beside them. He sat in the midst of people who were also his enemies technically. And so I think that was unwise. And so I think it's a choice we really have to build up boundaries and and really invite God in, so we know when we should be in a space and when we should not be. And so a lot of times I think we kind of stay in places that we shouldn't be. And sometimes we're there to maybe prove a point that, I'm strong enough to be here. You're not going to run me away, or that you're not going to, do any number of things. And so it leads us to gather around people who really don't mean us any harm. And sometimes I think, again, that we do it just to prove that they can't break us, so to speak. And so that's not necessarily where a space that we may need to be in. But to be sure, I think we should always check in with God and to find out where he would have us to be, and what's healthy for us and what is not healthy for us. And again, I think the point that Bishop Jakes raised this week is that, God wants us to live bigger than just for ourselves, of course. But he also wants us to set up boundaries so that we can be successful in this life, and so that we can avoid some of the pitfalls that we don't need to be a part of. And so those are thoughts I want to keep in mind. And again, let's make a deal, as I say, in the Louisville area, to really live bigger than just for us. And again, one of the things that he pointed out is that it's nothing wrong with having a car, having a home, and having a lot of possessions, so to speak. But I think the point he raised again is that we just cannot, even with that, if there's evidence, I guess I should say, that we are, striving to help someone else, then that's fine. And even if there's evidence that we are seeking to serve God, and to be of service, in the ways that God would have us to be. And we'll talk a little bit about that maybe somewhere in the podcast, and what that looks like. But I think the point is, should be focused on something more than ourselves, something bigger than ourselves. And so thank you again for joining the Mini P Pod. And I have company today, and I don't know if you can see or hear Rocky's, my yellow lab, which is hilarious, but I guess he wanted to be a part of the podcast today. So with that, we'll close out today. But before we do, we always want to spotlight somebody. And so this week, just real quickly, I will spotlight Michael Todd. And I talk a lot about him, and his name didn't necessarily come up so much this time, but he is actually someone who's doing a great work for God out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he's a little unorthodox, and I dare say a little, I was going to say a little hood, but no, he's definitely maybe a little street. And so, I love that God has something for all of us, and uses people from all different, walks of life to speak to his people. But Michael Todd is someone who's really actually he has a book out that's pretty popular, and I'll put that inside of the podcast as well. And so and it's doing quite well, and I'm sure it's very good. And so so take a chance to check that out. But also, if you get an opportunity, please flip over to his his broadcast. And so I'll leave that down in the comments as well. And so you have pictures of he and his family. But again, he's doing a great work for God, and a little bit unorthodox, almost a little bit comical, but he has some great points to make for all of us to absorb. And so again, guys, say hi to Rocky over there. I think he wants to go out, and so we'll make that happen. But again, thank you for joining the Mini P Pod, and I certainly have enjoyed our time together. And again, if we just would make a deal to really let God help us in the Louisville area to figure the things out that need to be done, and to help us to work on some things that God would have us to work on individually before we are able to actually go out and to help others. And let's make a deal also to have the crucial conversations that we know we need to have with our loved ones and with our neighbors, and also with God. And so that we know we have marching orders, so to speak, in a good way, of things that we need to accomplish and things that we need to do in order to be successful, and not just to talk about again the things that are going on in the Louisville area, but also to have an effect on those things. And so some things have been going on for way too long, and we certainly need God's help in that, and we certainly need to jump in, but we need to know how. And so even with that, and so the final thing again, as we just finished talking about, let's make a deal in the Louisville area and really all across the world to really live bigger than for ourselves. And so to really to seek to do that, and it's God honoring, and it'll help our community, and it'll help so many things that we need to actually step out and take a part of. So again, thank you for joining the Mini P Pod, and so I look forward to speaking with you again next week, and we'll go from there. But thank you again, and have a great week, and really live bigger than just for us. Have the crucial conversation. Start now. Begin to build up and put the boundaries in place, and do it even now. Don't wait. Do it this very moment, and start putting those bricks back in place to get the boundaries back in place, so we don't let things out that don't need to be out, and we don't let things in that don't intend to do us any harm. And again, please, as a community, guys, let's let God in and invite God in to help and to direct us into every situation, even as we participate. For those who are doing Black Lives Matter or any of the protests, please let God guide and lead you in that, and all of us in that. And for those of us who are affecting change in other ways, please allow God in. And so thank you again, and I will see you guys next week.
Girl, I'm in love with you, but this ain't the honeymoon. We're past the infatuation phase. We're right in the thick of love. At times we get sick of love. It seems like we argue every day. I know I misbehaved, and you've made your mistakes, and we both still got room left to grow. And though love sometimes hurts, I still put you first, and we'll make this thing work. But I think we should take it slow. We're just ordinary people. We don't know which way to go, 'cause we're ordinary people. Maybe we should take it slow. Take it slow, This time we'll take it slow. Take it slow, This time we'll take it slow.